All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight on your brain. Today's white lightning will be about Wheel of Time, because it's going to be terrible. Everything is terrible.
Well, I'd like to start this off with a little disclaimer. There's going to be a lot of spoilers for the books. So if you have not read the books and you plan on doing so, probably not the episode for you until you have read it, because it's very relevant to the topic. And we have to give some things away all the way up until the last books. So, but yeah, go ahead and start us off.
Well, I'm trying to decide where to start. Well, we kind of mentioned some of it last time.
Well, let's just describe the situation. So
Yeah,
there's a series of books that both Heath and I were great fans of, that by Robert Jordan, they're called the Wheel of Time series. And I started reading it back in like 1993, I think,
yeah,
was when I started reading it, and then introduced Heath to it in high school
college.
and college. And we were going through the series as he was writing the books. Unfortunately, Mr. Jordan passed away before he could finish the series, and someone else came in collaboration with his wife to finish. But fortunately, to our understanding, there was a lot of notes. He had outlined everything all the way through. It was basically just putting it down in paper artistically.
Literally millions of words of notes.
Mm-hmm.
He had to have at least one, if not two assistants, plus his wife by the end, because he had so many notes. He needed help just keeping everything straight. You know, kind of kind of like how a historian will have a research assistant while writing a book, and he basically had a research assistant for his own world because that's how many notes he had on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he created his own little world. In what we consider an epic story around it. I mean, we can nitpick about the ending and how that, if it was what he intended, or it kind of did seem a little rushed at the end, but we're 14 books into, 14 books over 1,000 pages each into the series, with at least 25, 30 different storylines that you're trying to follow.
Yeah.
And he was also very descriptive in these books. So we get to 2020, and of course, as is the natural progression, Hollywood wants to take over and do a screen version of these books because they're highly popular. They know they're going to make money, and you basically have somewhat of a script written for you. You just got to put it into live action. So that's normal, and there's always the fan apprehension of how are they going to fuck this up.
Yes.
With any book being turned into a series. We see it with Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones started off really great. Obviously, it was very highly popular as a series, but then it just derailed at the end, and that made the fans very angry, because it wasn't what he intended. And I think you can't give the author a pass, because he should have finished the book, or at least been a little bit more like, no, it's not supposed to go that way.
And by their own statements, this is what Amazon Prime is hoping for, is their own Game of Thrones. That's what they want this series to be.
Well, at least these are finished and they know how it's supposed to end.
Which, although it does present its own set of problems, because even though you have the source material the whole time, which is where Game of Thrones started to really go off the rails, is when they ran out of source material. So you have the source material for the whole series, but it is something of a problem that the series is so long. How many books did it end up being? 13?
14.
14 books, all of them
supposed to be 15, but I think they really wanted to get it done.
So 14 books. I don't think all of them are over 1,000 pages.
For those that can see behind me on that shelf behind that's the row of them all the way up until.
The first several are, like 400, 500, 600 pages long, but then the last ones get to be 1,000 pages because they're very long. So there's your first problem right off the bat, is, okay, well, how are you going to cut this down to make it not a never-ending story?
Well, and another problem, he wrote everything through first person view of individuals in each chapter. Nothing was ever third person. And so now you've got to convey the thoughts of this person on the screen versus just seeing a live action of something. So you've got to translate someone's thoughts of what's happening to a scene where we can all watch from a bird's eye view.
Well, and that's where the characters become so real, that we mentioned last time, is that because it's not just, you know, Rand did this thing and saw this thing and thought this thing. It is from his perspective. So you are hearing his thoughts and getting his perspective of how does he view this event or this item or whatever. How does he view it? How does he describe it? And that makes them all more real. But it also gets into the gender roles that we mentioned last time that are going to be problematic because the production has demonstrated such high degrees of wokeness. And they're going to be problematic because you're not allowed to have anything negative about any marginalized group. Even if it's Huck Finn. It's why we can't have Huck Finn in libraries, because they use the N-word. Yes, they do, in a negative context. That Huck Finn grows as a character and realizes that this person is a person, and the N-word is used in a negative context to show how ignorant and wrong and evil these people are. So,
well, I'd start even where, so anything updated in the last couple months, I don't know, other than the fact that it's about to be released. And I guess we'll bite the bullet and give them their money to watch it to make sure. But there's a lot of events along the way that caused me to lose interest in tracking this, even though it was something that as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh yay, we're gonna get this.
Oh yeah.
But the first one actually has nothing to do with wokeness. They wrote out a character, unless they've changed something since I've saw the original reports. They wrote out Tom.
I had not heard that, or if I did, I'd completely forgotten it. But and
and if you've read the book, you can't even underestimate how important he is to the cohesiveness of the story.
Yeah,
I have no idea how they're going to tell that story without him.
He brings in so much to the story in the way that he ties these, these bumpkins from the backwoods into the world that they don't know about. Well, he ties those all together.
Yeah, there's a common thread when you start with teenage protagonists, right? There's a common thread in all the great stories that starts with the teenage protagonist is some sort of guide, some sort of mentor, some sort of person that keeps them alive in the early stages when they're growing into the hero role. And he was that. Him and Walrain were that.
Yeah.
And both of them together were integral. Now they just put it all on her, as far as I know, which she's supposed to be the star of season 1. So that's what I've heard about that.
Which is fine and makes sense because she is so integral to establishing the plot in the first book. You can make her the main character, the main focus of the first season, and that makes sense. But to do it by cutting out, frankly, the white male character who is the white male guide and guardian. Come on, man.
Well, let's not even get to white male yet, because they could have, if it was about being a white male, they could have always just changed his skin color, right?
Which
is what they did. But when you look at the story as a whole, again, there's going to be spoilers, and we're just giving away one of the endings right here. The love interest between Tom and Walrain was the glue. It was like they were mom and dad to all of these young people coming
exactly
up. Even from the very beginning, before they even knew each other.
And that's what made it.
In fact, it was their conflict that helped.
That's what made it so interesting, and again made the character so real, is because there was a sexual tension there early on between these two characters who didn't really like each other.
Well, yeah, in fact, they were working against each other. in a lot of ways, because they both thought they were protecting these kids in a completely different way.
And that's back to that perspective that he gives you in the way Jordan writes, is they were both trying to do good and trying to do right by these teenagers, these young men and young women. They were both trying to do right by them, but so neither one of them was a bad guy, neither one of them was an antagonist, but they just had completely different views on what doing right by these young men and women meant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of how Wheel of Time could be another Game of Thrones, but they're doing so much from the beginning that makes us go, ugh. Because one of the things that makes Game of Thrones so well, one of the things people talked about right off the bat were the main characters that get killed. Sean Bean, poor Sean Bean, who dies in everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of your hero of the first season, and he gets killed at the end of the first season. Why? Because consequences have action, or actions have consequences. Okay. And even though he was doing right, even though he was the good guy, he was the noble one, he was also rather stubborn in how he did it. And those actions that he took had consequences.
Mm-hmm.
The main kind of theme of Game of Thrones, at least from those first few good seasons, is that your actions have consequences. The red wedding came from someone breaking his word,
Mm-hmm.
okay, to do what he wanted. Okay, those actions had dire consequences.
I guess I should put another disclaimer. We're going to have a lot of spoilers for a lot of different shows.
Well, and I think it's relevant because so many people have seen Game of Thrones, and because that's what everyone's going to compare it to. Mm-hmm. And that's why
we could use Sean Bean again in Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
He did the wrong things because he thought he was doing the right thing. He mm-hmm. thought protecting the world was to be what his action was going to protect the world.
Yeah.
And the ring in its evilness used that to control him, used his willingness to try to be the hero for the mm-hmm. entire world as his weakness.
And in really good stories, the really memorable stories, no one is protected from consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is no plot armor in a good story. Okay, Sean Bean did not have plot armor in either one of those stories. He mm-hmm. ended up dying because those were the logical consequences of what that character did.
Mm-hmm.
And the same in Wheel of Time. You see the main one, especially when it comes to gender roles, and like that's the one that jumps out at me, because Robert Jordan was so good at writing it, and also writing it in a way that a good stand-up comedian will use something like racial stereotypes to make you laugh, but mm-hmm. also make a point. Okay, he used the way the characters thought about gender roles as comic relief a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you're seeing it from their perspective, so you're seeing their stereotypes, their assumptions, and their arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
And that arrogance is one of the big themes you see through the book when it comes to character actions and motivations. Mm-hmm. And what leads to consequences.
Well, and not only
arrogance,
not only the male female, but also just the differences across these different places. So each country was sort of an island, not by physical nature, but by culture and by how they interacted with the world around them. So again, that was one of the main themes, was the constant, basically, judgment of everyone else around you because they weren't you. The tribalism of these places.
Yes. And they could tell because everything grew in such isolation, they could tell pretty well right off the bat where you were from by your physical appearance.
Mm-hmm. And to the main characters, they had no clue about the world other than description, because the only interaction with the outside world for almost anybody in that area was the one guy that came in to bring stuff, the
Yeah.
peddler that would come in and bring stuff, which he's in the show. We can't have it without him. I can't see without Tom, but Fane is in the show. But he would bring in the outside world to this place. So his stories of the outside world would be their only expectations. What, you know, if you went to a different country, you would probably interact with those people based on the stories you heard, because that's how it's supposed to be. That's what I heard, right? Yeah. And the first time you would see somebody that looked different would be a shock. And so that's when we get to the wokeness, because this is how wokeness ruins everything.
Right. And this really annoyed me right off the bat, because so the wokeness we're talking about here is the production decided that they needed to have a great deal of diversity in their casting.
Which, if you did it by the book, you would. It just
would have
be
diversity.
It just wouldn't be in that main group of people.
Yeah, it wouldn't be right off the bat, but as the story expands, as they move outward and you encounter more of these cultures and peoples, you would see. I think the main thing, though, that made them go is the fact that in the Wheel of Time main continent, there are no Black or Asian people. That they all come from the other continent. You do see them eventually when this group,
the sea folk were apparently Black by description. Okay. Yeah,
I always assumed they were Indian by their description. They were South Asian.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah. Okay, so again, here's part of the issue here. So the wokies that defend this say, well, he never said they were white. He never said they were this. He never said they were that. No, because he used real language to describe people. That would be lazy to say,
yes,
these 4 white people did this. Yes. And the sea folk showed up and they're like Black people. No. He would describe how dark their skin was.
And someone in that setting wouldn't think about, these are our terms. He's giving you language that makes sense for the setting. Mm-hmm. And he's using it by describing skin tone, by describing dress, by describing, hair, and these kinds of things. But when they were first talking about it, the reason it made me nervous was because they were doing it for diversity's sake. Mm-hmm. If you wanted diversity, but you weren't doing it for diversity's sake, you could have just come out and said, look, we can't do this element of the story because it would be too constraining in our casting. We don't want to limit our casting. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I was just looking at the trailer and Ernie Hudson's in it. I love Ernie Hudson. I'm all for Ernie Hudson being whoever the heck he was. So
if you want to say Hudson?
The 4th Ghostbuster.
Well, bring up a picture so I might be able to tell you who he is in the show.
Okay. Well, I'll get to that in a second because I want to talk about
here, I'll just look it up while you're talking.
All right, I got him right here. Anyway, so I'm mostly sure that's Ernie Hudson. Anyway, point being, if you had Denzel Washington is probably, in my mind, the greatest actor of our age. If you wanted Denzel Washington in this for some reason, you say, look, we know that by the source material, that's not what this character looks like, but he's awesome and we want him in this. Mm-hmm. So we're going to, for creative license, we're going to ignore that element of the setting. Mm-hmm. Perfectly understandable, and there might be some super nerds that are going to complain because that's not how that character is supposed to look. But most people go, oh, yeah, that makes sense because he's an awesome actor. So we will ignore this element and we will try and show that idea in different ways, like in the way people dress or act or something like that. Mm-hmm. But that's not why they did it. They did it for the sake of wokeness. Well, okay, then how are we supposed to trust that you're actually casting quality actors for these roles rather mm-hmm. than people who fit your perceived notions of, frankly, here's why wokeness is so disgusting to me, because you might as well have a color wheel for people. Mm-hmm. Why do on the census, when we have all these stupid ethnic, check one ethnic boxes. Why don't they just give us a color wheel? Because that's what you really mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're really talking about. I mean, we mentioned it. You brought it up in the Kaepernick nonsense where he was claiming that he brought a he took a girl to prom who was very black, who was much darker than him. Why don't you just have a color wheel? Because that's what you're talking about there. And I think it's that disgusting, and people need to think about it in those terms. And
Yeah, and I think I'm wanting to say it's John McWhorter talks about this quite often in his little rants with Glenn Lowry, that when things are done that way, even when you are a highly qualified person, as he knows he is, as far as his professorship and writing, his writing ability and everything, you always sit there and wonder if you have any kind of integrity, if there wasn't somebody better and you got this because. So in this case, the actors, do these actors and actresses sit there and say, I got this part because I'm the best? Or do they actually know, well, I got this part because I was pretty good, but they wanted diversity? And that's all. That if you have any kind of integrity, that's going to be in the back of your mind.
Something else I wanted to jump to here. This is just kind of a complete change of subject. Here's one of my other big concerns when I first saw the trailer. That looks like a Star Trek set to me. That looks cheap. And that was the first thing that jumped out at me with a lot of the trailer is this looks cheap. This looks like Wheel of Time done by the CW network, not Amazon Prime. So one of my other concerns is, okay, how much work did you put in to make it look good? And the Game of Thrones references or comparisons are useful here too, because a lot of people don't realize that early on, before it exploded and went bonkers worldwide, Game of Thrones was lowish budget, especially for that kind of film, the high fantasy kind of setting that requires a lot of work to put in the costuming and setting. But and you can see it if you compare the first couple with the last couple of seasons, just in scope, really. But it never looked cheap in those first couple of seasons. They really worked to maximize the budget that they did have, so that everything you looked at looked like $1 million, even if it was being held together with baling wire and duct tape.
Yeah,
And
it did look pretty cheap. I need to watch that trailer.
I'm not sure I haven't looked to see the production people who are doing this, but one of the reasons Game of Thrones looked so good and did so well is because a lot of those production people had worked on HBO's Rome. I don't know if you ever watched that. And
I have not.
It's pretty good, especially if you're a history nerd. Even if you're not a history nerd, there's a lot of boobs in it, so you probably like it for that. But one of the things that killed Rome was the budget. It was successful, but it wasn't successful enough for HBO to justify its budget. So they learned how to do this kind of epic thing with a tighter budget and still make it feel epic, even if you didn't, even if you're not seeing the 10,000 man CG army and extras and everything, even if you're not seeing it, you can film it in a way that you feel that. And that's what they were able to do in those first couple scenes of Game of Thrones without making it look cheap and without breaking the budget. So
another show that was like that was Last Kingdom, and this is what gave me hope with the casting. Was originally the person responsible for the casting was the same person who did that show. And so it was like, okay, they're going to do a good job, because it was not politically correctly cast, and it was good acting all the way through, even though these unheard of people were in it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, cool, we're going to have a normal casting with good where the main thing is performance versus other characteristics ahead of the performance. And that's with everything. If you have something other than ability as your first marker, and we're going to go back to the NFL on this, if you have something other than ability as your first criteria, you narrow the talent pool big time. And so you're going to get the result you deserve. When we talked about prototypical quarterbacks, 6'4", 230 pounds, whatever, if that's your first criteria, then you've narrowed the talent market. You've gotten rid of every Drew Brees, Lamar Jackson, Kyle Murray, any of those guys out of there. Michael Vick, pick your smaller than that quarterback. We saw that here in Houston when they brought in Ryan Mallett and Tom Savage. They had the measurables, quote unquote. We can make them into a good quarterback. Well, no, you couldn't, because they sucked, and they never became good quarterbacks. But the first criteria was their size. Bill O'Brien could not get over that prototypical quarterback size and arm strength. So,
well, we had it here in Dallas. I ranted about it, that the criteria for way too long under Garrett and his staff was, does this person fit our scheme? And so they picked Taco Charlton, who had a lot of measurables, but also had a lot of question marks, but played in college in the same scheme that they ran here in Dallas, and completely skipped TJ Watt, who on film and by any expert's expectation was a way better talent, was a way better performer than Taco Charlton. But their first priority was, does this person fit our scheme? And look what it cost them.
I think one of the best examples of this, remember when Chase Daniel was at Missouri? Okay, so he was a talented quarterback at Missouri, but he was kind of the Drew Brees, undersized, ran around a lot kind of quarterback as well. His backup got drafted before him, hardly ever played a college snap, but he was 6'4" and 230 pounds. And they said, we can make him into an NFL quarterback. Well, he couldn't even make it on the starting field in the college game.
I didn't know that. That's amusing. You'd think at some point people would learn. And I mean, there's a saying now, go woke, go broke. And at some point you would think people would learn.
We don't even have to talk about the wokies or the race issue or the gender issues or any of that. If you put a quality ahead of performance in any job, anywhere, you will get a diluted result. You may get lucky. You may have that person that just never had a chance, but it's chances are, if they have the measurables, they've had every chance in the book. So, yeah.
Well, another example that has nothing to do with the wokeness then would be Christian art and media. It's subpar because this is a Christian first who does comedy, or a Christian first who does music. And that's why they never break through into a wider market, because it's first, they're this first. The ones who are successful
are the ones who are talented and then say, I am a Christian.
Yeah. Okay.
And I want to put this theme in my.
Steven Crowder did not start out to be a Christian comic. He started out to be a comic. He wanted to do stand-up. He just happens to be a Christian. That's why he has over 1 million subscribers, and lots of people who aren't Christians view him. A lot of people who are Christians don't like him because he's too foul-mouthed. And I'm like, Blackie Lawless, the lead singer of Wasp, he now does Christian-themed albums, but you wouldn't really know it if you didn't know his story of his kind of his character arc to becoming born again much later in his life. You wouldn't really know it when you listen to these albums, because he's a musician first, he's an artist first. That's why his later albums are so good, compared to a lot of the 80s bands that we used to listen to that are still releasing stuff, but it's not even remotely close to what it was when they were first big.
Another example would be Kanye West. He built an empire before he used it to tell people what he believed. So,
hello, doggies. It also makes, and this makes me worry, not just so where their priorities are, we're seeing it in the casting. But it makes me worry, where is that going to show up in the screenplay as well? Of if you have these priorities other than telling this story and telling it to the best of your ability, where is that going to show up in the screenplay? And you brought up Tom Maryland not even being in the story, just completely cut out,
which
which
I
just
can't even
boggles my
understand, because
mind.
not only is he so integral, but he would have been the perfect place to put things like your comic relief and it be perfectly natural versus forced. It would be the anti Jar Jar Binks, right? So now I'm wondering where the comedy is going to come from. I'm assuming they're going to use Matt for that, but
Yeah.
which he's a good outlet for it, but hopefully it's not overdone. Although from what I understand, the season 1 actor for him is different than the season 2 actor for him. But
That's always awkward.
yeah, that's always awkward. But let's go ahead and give a visual. So where everybody's coming from. So this is, and I'm going to get into activism here in a little bit, because part of the problem is not only is it woke as in we need to do this because we're good people, but there's an activist bend to it. And this goes back to the cap thing, because part of the goal is the response. So let's go back to Wheel of Time 101, what we kind of grew up with. And so you're talking about now we're building a stage for expectations. We're not expecting white characters because we're white and that's what we want, which is what they'll tell you. This is what their response would be. They're saying you just want it to be that way because of the way you look, right? So when we go to the actual Wheel of Time, this is the cover art for most of so a lot of the books. So let me bring a bigger one of that first one. So this is your introduction. If you bought book 1 day 1, this is the cover art that you got. So this would be Moiraine, her basically bodyguard here, Lan, and then I'm assuming that's going to be Rand right there. And then
Even though it kind of looks like Nicolas Cage to me, but
yeah, it kind of does.
The cover art is notoriously bad among
yeah,
among fans.
There are a few that are good. Path of Daggers was pretty good.
Yeah.
I liked Rising Shadows cover art. So here you've got Rand, and then you've got Matt. Let's see if I can make that any bigger. Yeah, it just gets blurry though. Book 2 was pretty crappy, especially since he's supposed to be massive. But
yep.
But so you've got your cover art. You've kind of got an expectation via that. Then we've got the descriptions, and we talk about the people who came from this village. I don't know how many times the word pale was used for their skin, because there's a lot of nakedness in these books in different parts, and that the word pale comes up a lot. So now let's get to the cast. All right, this is the original casting. These 5 are the 5 from the village that came up. This is the gal, and this is the bodyguard. All right. Now, when we talk about height and stuff, you want them to try to kind of match that because it was important for a lot of these things, but you're going to give a little bit of wiggle room, because to find people of the stature that is described in these books would have been really narrowing the talent pool. So you want at least, okay, he's supposed to be a big guy. Well, he's bigger than most, so we're cool.
Yeah.
Right? You want him to be the tallest. Well, he's a little bit taller, right? So he's supposed to be the tallest. He's supposed to be next, but he's also supposed to be a big dude. So we're going to go ahead and give them that. He's supposed to be about my size by description. And he looks a lot smaller than me, but I don't know. I never stood next to him.
Oh, you can fudge it with screen tricks. I mean, Tom Cruise is 4'9", so
yeah,
whatever.
Well, and these 2 are supposed to be tiny.
Yeah.
All 3 of these are supposed to be tiny in stature. Now, one thing I thought was lazy, she's supposed to have almost black, dark hair. And you could dye her freaking hair for a show.
They do. When you see her.
They do? Okay.
Yeah, when you see
I saw some of
Moiraine
the
in the
cover
trailer.
photos, and it looked like she still had blonde hair, but here's the thing. here 2 points. First of all, if you're going to be a fanboy and say it has to be like the book, again, the word pale was used often for especially these two, because they had to do a lot of things where it basically brought attention to the fact that they had super pale skin, including the time they were with the sea folk, where it was in contrast to what they look like, what was described as the sea folk, right? And same for him. He was pale, and he is supposed to have an impressive beard at some point, but not in the beginning. So in the trailer, do they have him clean shaven?
I can't remember.
Okay, so he should be clean shaven in the beginning, because part of the story revolved around growing that beard. So the descriptions aside, here's where I have the problem. We go back to this. You could tell where someone was from by how they looked. If you're going to do the diverse cast, these 4 should all look the same, versus one guy standing out. He should stand out because he is supposed to look different. And
because he was born outside of the little English village, basically, where the setting starts. It's basically a village in medieval England, which is why everyone's so fair.
There was fan stuff that went on while Jordan was still alive that he agreed with, as this is exactly what I'm trying to represent. And
again, it matters in the story because, you know, the 2 girls go to a place, you know, pretty early on in the 3rd, 4th book, where they go off to a place that's more Mediterranean, where the people are more Mediterranean, and so they stand out, and they have to try and blend in, even though they're short, pale English women, basically, in a Mediterranean place, in a Mediterranean culture.
Now, a lot of the Wookiees, in defense, use one line from the whole show where someone pulls his shirt aside and looks at his skin and says, well, you're too pale to be from the 2 rivers. And so they're saying, oh, they must be dark. No. He's supposed to be a super ginger. It's like Irish compared to British, right? Which is the description. And then they actually, from a look standpoint, got someone who represented what the main character should kind of look like: tall, red hair, pale skin. So hopefully that didn't narrow the talent pool too much. But and actually, by description, he actually comes out as very Asian by description. So they obviously paid attention there. But then they said, let's go ahead and make all this diverse.
Well, I'm not sure how much that had to do with, you can read Land's description as more Asian, that the borderlands where he comes from, the culture is very obviously influenced by Bushido and classic samurai tropes, and honor and a warrior culture, because they are on the border between the civilized lands and where all the monsters live. So it could just be that, well, these people are all supposed to be samurai, and we can't have a white samurai unless it's Tom Cruise. So let's just make him Asian.
Well, but they do make some kind of descriptors with his eyes, and and he was supposed to have slightly darker skin tone versus the 2 rivers folk and everything. So, which is, again, he was supposed to have a darker skin tone than the 2 rivers folk
because he stands out.
Now, I do understand they can't make him as massive as he was, because to find a massive Asian dude that's also a good actor would be a pretty tough.
Is Bolo not working anymore? Get him. He's great.
He's a little old for this at this point. But so okay. So again, you have forgiveness as a fan, but within reason. You take away one of the main story plots by trying to do the other thing. Now, she obviously, you dye her hair and she does look kind of the part.
Yeah.
Let me see. Here's another little better view. So there should be in this section of people, which are the 2 rivers folk, there should be one of these people is not like the other. Not 2 of these people are not like the other. So that's the complaint. It's not that they went with a certain group of people. It's that they they should have done it across the board.
Yeah.
Because then it actually would have made him stand out more. And then you could have tailored the story around that. You could have changed other places in how they were to match that. And that would have been fine.
Yeah.
But it takes away that whole element of the story when you try to do this whole diversity thing.
Yeah. And again, it is taking away elements of the story. It's not just, oh, well, this should be like this because it's like that in the books. No. So an example would be the witches, basically, or the female wizards, basically, of the setting are supposed to have what is called an ageless face. Well, you obviously don't see that in the trailer because these obviously there are obviously a lot of them that are middle-aged women and they look it. Well, okay. What is the ageless face is one of those things like H.P. Lovecraft stories of the unspeakable horror. Well, how do you actually show that?
You know who I
in
always
film?
imagined when I was reading the books as a young kid? Susan Lucci as Maureen. And because she was in soaps for so long, for like 30 years, and always looked the same age.
Yeah.
That's who I imagined. I don't know if that puts it in perspective.
Well, I've seen it done. There's some graphic novels that are pretty good, and they kind of do a decent job of showing that in print. But how do you do it in film?
See,
I mean,
now you've got me imagining just too much Botox.
Exactly. It's what does that mean besides like too much Botox, and how would you do that either with makeup or you would have to, computerize DH someone after, which is going to be really expensive. That's really going to eat into your budget. And so it's understandable to say we're going to kind of ignore that. We'll try and show it some other way because we just can't do that feasibly. And that's understandable because now that does impact the story in certain ways because that face is a marker to people who know what it means that, ooh, that's a magic user. So that can impact, but it's not nearly as big an impact as the way people look being a cue to where they come from, what nationality they are.
Well, it actually is. It does play into it because the way people look is a judgment call to what you think about them. And if you saw the ageless face, you knew something about that person. You saw the tone of their skin and their hair color, you kind of knew where they were from. So it actually does play into it in just in a different way from a nationality standpoint. It's a marker. It's the Sneetches, right? It's something you can use to identify somebody.
And based on where that character is coming from is going to impact how they react. Which again, it's back to the Huck Finn example. These aren't always positive judgments that Jordan is making or portraying. There are a lot of bigoted assumptions by characters throughout the books, and it's not portrayed as a positive. And there are consequences to those bigoted judgments. And how are you going to show that unless you're just going to ignore it or have people magically pretend they know where these people is from, and the audience is like, how do they know that that's where these people are from when that person looks the same? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, and so then that comes into the argument. They're saying Jordan would have wanted it this way. Jordan would have. You can say that easily because he's dead, right? Yeah. But to what Jordan wanted, let's actually look at the words he said back in the early days when there was a lot of fandom, fan art, conspiracy theories around what's going to happen in the next book.
And
there
were so many plot threads and so much foreshadowing. There was a huge message board community of people
who actually killed who and who. Because some of those never got solved because they didn't put them in the last books. But so there's still a lot of that out there. But there was a person in the beginning of that, and it was actually put in some of the source material where that put the different regions in the area and put them with different civilizations, whether it's a current country or a civilization of the past. Like Tyr was Spain, right?
Right.
All the names, the descriptions, and it was like a Mediterranean part of Spain.
Yep.
Then Ilion was it was Greek, the Greek Empire, right? And then Saldia was Arabic. Like you said, the borderlands had that Bushido feel, so it was like Japan and that kind of
And
culture.
there was a lot of horse culture, so there was a lot of kind of allusions and descriptions of things that might remind you of the Central Asian steppe cultures.
Well, the two rivers was Texas.
Really?
This is Texas, and Manatharan that came out of it was the United States. And this actually makes sense. And this is, I think, why Jordan agreed with it. And this is actually before he did the subsequent books where this became more apparent, was not only Manatharan as the United States because of the rebellion against England, which was the manifestation of Andor, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the fact that if you look at when the two rivers became a kind of a kingdom on its own again under Perrin, it was because of the influx of the immigrants coming in and building the population and bringing all the diversity. So there's already where diversity was built in, but the two rivers in the original was the backwoods redneck Texan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you another thread where you're looking at it through that angle and you're like, well, we should kind of have kept with that kind of feel to it to get the actual feel of the whole story. But yeah, someone put Two Rivers as Texas, and Jordan was like, spot on.
I had not seen that before, but that makes sense in hindsight for sure. So there was, I was looking up while you were talking, and there was concern early on because apparently he wasn't going to be in it or they hadn't announced it. But I found an article from December of 2019 that Alexandra William, however you pronounce that, a Danish actor best known for his roles in The Last Kingdom, will play Tom Maryland.
Oh, okay. So they are bringing him in.
Mm-hmm.
Did you bring up a picture?
I don't think this one. It's not helpful. That's not helpful.
It's just really tough because as integral as he was to how everything started, to not see him in the first season.
I can't find a picture of him as Tom, and I don't recognize because I watched the first couple of seasons of Last Kingdom and I never finished it, and that was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't recognize who this is. But that's his picture from IMDb.
Let me see. Okay, I think I found him as Tom. It's not too bad. Not too bad from a fan perspective, I guess. He needs bigger mustaches. He needs more impressive mustache. But
okay, I recognize him more there than because I've seen him with that look before. The main thing for me is like you said, all of The Last Kingdom was very well acted. So I'm hopeful in that regard. I recognize the Asian guy who's playing Lan as, he's got one of those faces of, I know I've seen him in stuff, but I couldn't tell you what stuff. But I know I've seen him in stuff and done well. Moraine I've seen in things. So
yeah, she's like the big name they pulled in. The person they had doing Rand's dad.
I'm really nervous about the 5 younger characters because kids these days suck and I'm old and grumpy. So
who did they have playing his dad?
That I'm assuming, like a lot of what Prime has been doing with their originals, is they're going to release one a week, and so starting tomorrow night. And so I'll watch the first episode tomorrow, but I am not optimistic. Like I said, not just from all the wokeness, but just from the way it looks, I'm really
That's who
nervous
they
that it
have
kind of
playing
looks
Tam.
cheap.
He's pretty good. He's been in a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's a
he's one of the
face I
bigger names they
recognize.
brought in. Yeah. So they brought in some bigger names as supporting roles to make sure, I guess, the those main things were taken care of. But yeah, the young kids, which you're going to get that in any series if you have a young cast, it's going to be something new. But so hopefully they did good. I think that the way they did it took away from a big major part of the story. Now, my second part of the problem is it's on purpose.
Mhm.
It's on purpose, just like Cap kneeling was on purpose. Cap kneeling had nothing to do with the flag. It had everything to do with the reaction. Because when you talk about activism, which the director of this show is been outspoken about his activist views, they do it on the purpose is the reaction. So we know we are going to piss off this fan base by doing it this way. And their being pissed off is going to be proof of the inherent systemic racism in the
Right.
United States. So it's done for that purpose. And I hate that these young actors and actresses are actually basically pawns in this, unless they agree with it too. But if they don't, they're just trying to make their name, then they're players on a chessboard. But yeah, that's Hollywood these days. Its purpose is not to make good quality art. Its purpose is to press an agenda, and that's what pisses me off.
I'm looking at the writers right now, and I don't know. At least they've done stuff, which you'll notice, like some of this, the Star Wars stuff that flopped horribly bad and
Mhm.
was not good. And if you look at the writers, it's like, how did this person get hired on to write or help write this huge budget project when they've done like one thing and it wasn't good?
Mhm.
But at least these people have done stuff, even stuff I haven't seen. Some of them come from other HBO stuff. His Dark Material, which rings a bell, but I'm not sure what it is. Uh, some of them have done work on Marvel's Agents of Shield, which was okay. Chuck, some of them were writers on Chuck, so at least they know how to write stuff. I just hope they do well.
I'm hoping it's good. I
Yeah.
really am. Still gonna give it a shot, but it just when as we've been diving into this activism and the goal behind it all, and where it ends up showing up in basically all our modern life, and the entertainment industry is where it's really thrust in our face, is when you see that subplot, you
Mhm.
can't unsee it,
Mhm.
and it ruins everything for you. But yeah, it's that strategy. Do something you know is going to piss somebody off. Use their reaction as proof of why you did it.
Yeah.
A good example would be, I see that person, he's a violent person. I go up and punch him in the face and he punches me back. See, you're a violent person. It's very that's basically the strategy. You got a thinking face on.
Okay. That I was looking at the writer's credits, and one of them was credited with an episode called The Dragon Reborn, and it made me go, because it made me worried they were rushing this, but for some reason they have an episode in the middle of the first season called The Dragon Reborn, but it's not the book. It's not the third book already. They're not moving that fast. So, whoo, that was a close one.
Now, are they trying to do a book per season, or is it just going to be organic, theoretically organic all the way through?
It looks like a book a season.
So you're looking at 14 seasons.
So I don't have, I'm looking on IMDb right now, and it looks like it's 8 episodes for this first season, but they don't all have um they don't all have synopses, descriptions, but it looks like the the 7th episode is them in the Borderlands. And so there's no description for the 8th episode, but I assume that's them going on to the Eye of the World. So it looks like a book a season.
I mean, I could
Which,
see places where you can combine things like
yes.
book 4 and 5 could easily be combined, I think.
Mhm.
But book 1 and 2, that's a tough order to not do a whole season there. And the third one, which would be the most important, which would be the Dragon Reborn. That
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just such a massive amount of time, physical time in the books, where they're traveling across the country, then they have to travel across the country again, and then travel. And of course, remember, everybody, no cars, right? Travel across the country again in between books 2 and 3, and then have major events happen along the way with a lot of setup. Because book 3, see which one. Yeah, I can't see where, because the parent story starts to be set up a lot.
Well, my thinking was that some of these books, one of the things that not having to air on TV is helpful for is that you don't have to have a set block. Like an hour long TV episode is like 43 minutes long because you have set commercial breaks that you have to work around. And one of the things that streaming TV does well, when it does it well, is that they vary it based on the story, the script of that time. They're not all, now they're all close to, because there is an element of story beats and just attention span. So they're all close to, but my hope is that as the books get longer, the seasons are going to get longer, a few more episodes with slightly more length, because things get pretty meaty there in the middle.
Well, so this is we talked about how descriptive he is. That helps with the visual media, because walking into a room could have been almost half a chapter in the book, whereas you see the room, you see everything in there, as long as they make sure they
especially if it's
points.
Especially if it's a place you're getting to for the first time.
Now this is where Game of Thrones went wrong in the last few seasons, and I was talking about books 2 and 3 where they travel a lot. In Game of Thrones, it was almost like blip, okay, they're here. Okay, blip, they're here. When it would have been 2 weeks of travel for that army.
You lose all sense of time in those last couple of seasons, and it just seems like everything's happening right away, right on top of itself. So hopefully they don't lose that sense of time and scale.
In the first few seasons, they did it in a way that, you saw so-and-so, and then you saw so-and-so 2 weeks later, but they also showed kind of, this happened in this other place during that time. And so you kind of kept your sense of time during those first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, where at the end, kind of everything was under one storyline by the end. And so you lost that sense of what's happening in between, because it was like, oh, this army's here. Oh, now this army is here. Oh, now they're killing each other. Oh, now something got blown up. All right, these people are dead.
And that's what I mean by things get meatier in the middle. There is that Katie, is that as the plot unfolds, you get more and more characters and more plot lines. And so, especially like, I think books 4, 5, and 6, there's so much going on. Those are going to have to be pretty hefty seasons. Something like Path of Daggers is a much more streamlined story and could be a shorter season. And so I hope they don't try and fit things into a block, and they craft the best story they can, and then let the number of episodes and the size of each episode adjust slightly, within reason, because obviously the longer you go, the more budget you're going to have as well, and they're going to have to be cognizant of that, as well as attention span. But
Well, we'll see. We will see.
Well, are you going to be able to? Are you traveling tomorrow?
Yeah, well, we don't leave till
Theoretically,
I could probably download the episodes, huh? I have Prime.
I can't remember when because they do this with the Expanse too, and I think it's usually like 6 or 7 Central on Friday when things like the Expanse and the Grand Tour and these other things that are
Yeah,
Prime
we
originals that I
fly out at
watch.
7. So
So you might be able to. It just depends on when they drop it. Which I was just on Prime and I don't see it available. Yeah, maybe it'll show up tomorrow, but right now it just says available November 19th.
well, I mean, I've got a freaking 11-hour flight, so if I can download it before I get on the plane, I can watch a few episodes, a couple. I might be able to get through the whole season.
No, they're only going to release it one at a time, I'm quite sure, because that's what they've been doing with their originals, is they release them once a week.
Once a week. Okay, so I can watch the first one and then on the
Mhm.
way back watch the second one. Okay. So yeah, and we'll give it a try and we'll come back and either eat crow or reinforce what we said.
Hopefully eat crow, because I really want this to be good.
I do really want it to be good.
I'm not optimistic right now, but based on what things that were said during pre-production. Not, and again, this isn't just the casting of people; it's their own words of why they cast them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I just like to make this statement when we talk about any of these things, whether it was last week's Murray, Kaepernick, the Wheel of Time, or any of these things that are going forward. I just want to just look at the camera and say, activists, we're on to you. We know your strategy, and the more people understand that, the more they're going to look at you and say, shut up, just give me a good product.
Yeah.
So
And it's, I think
because
it's
realistically, knowing the underlying goal, a good product is almost an accident at this point. Because the goal was something else and it just happened to maybe come out good on the other end. And that's kind of not a comfortable thought.
A good example of that is one of my favorite TV shows, even though you wouldn't know it because I yell at it the whole time I'm watching it, is The West Wing. And what's his face? Aaron Sorkin, what he did after The West Wing, I think that was Newsroom. It flopped. It did 2 seasons, did not do well. And that's because by that point he was an activist. So The West Wing, he was a writer and a producer and a director. And his primary goal was to make a good television series. It just happened to be heavily left, heavily, fawning of the Democratic Party because he was a Democrat, right? But it was still watchable and very good, even if you disagreed with every single political thing he said, because the first priority was engaging camera work, a snappy script, and really, really good acting from every character from the top to the bottom. And so it's very watchable, even if you're apolitical, let alone, me, and you're spending the whole time yelling at the screen. Because the first priority is to make something good. Then you fast forward a little bit where that's no longer the first priority, where that's the second priority, and it's crap. And I think it's illustrative of the bubble that these people live in, because you would think that just on pure self-interest, you wouldn't make it so blatant. Like I said, why not just say, hey, we're not going to do this part of the story, of the setting and the casting, because we don't want to limit ourselves in our casting that way. But you come right out and say, we're trying to be woke, we're doing diversity for diversity's sake. What kind of a bubble do you live in where you don't realize that's not going to go over well? I mean, we've been over the numbers that literally less than 10% buy into this idea of ultra woke progressive nonsense. It's around 8 or 9%, depending. I've heard as low as 6%, depending on whose numbers you're looking at. So that's who you're speaking to when you say we're hiring a diverse cast for diversity's sake. You're talking to 6% of the population, 10% at most.
And when they're trying to cover their tracks, they'll say things. We want to bring in a bigger audience. We know we're going to get the original Wheel of Time people, which are the, us, nerds, right? But we want to bring in that other group of people. So that's what they'll say. That's the feel good part of it. But again, everything took a different bend. So when this first started, the casting started, that was when we started going to lockdowns and stuff, and the history of this podcast we're talking about. That's when I finally had time to start looking at things and being like, why does this not make sense? But I was naive at that point, and I got on the message board and I was like, oh, well, this is kind of lazy activism, because you're just plugging in, you're forcing this in just to say I'm a good person. Well, that was wrong. The end goal was the reaction. Me posting on that board was part of the goal, to get naive people like me to be just like, what the hell? Because all of a sudden you're showing your racism. They have textbooks on this thing. This is the manual for activism in the current day and age. They have everything from media to showing up in flash mobs and everything.
It's the latest edition of Rules for Radicals. It's not a new concept. It's just new techniques.
And again, it covers everything from in person to digital media. And now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And it's so obvious when it happens. And realistically, there should be pushback to that, because the goal is to piss people off.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
On that note, should I transition to my rant? I think we're done with the Wheel of Time here.
Yeah, let me take a potty break.
Okay. So speaking of intentional gaslighting, I mean, that's the term for it. The Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? This trial is one of the many reasons I have absolutely no faith in the country or the future, because this trial, to exist in the first place, is Banana Republic, Soviet Union, 30s Germany bullshit. And the way it has been covered makes it even worse. And what is coming, I haven't watched every bit of it, but I have watched most of it, either live or watch the videos after the fact. And the prosecutor's presentation, I don't even know where to start, except to say that every day of this man's life, someone needs to come up to him and say, you are a lying piece of shit and you are a coward. Come on, let's go. Don't hide behind your security. Don't hide behind your job. Come on, what are you going to do? Bring a gun to a fist fight? Come on, let's go. Because that's what you said about this 17-year-old kid. He literally said that Kyle is guilty because he brought a gun to a fist fight. He literally said that Kyle Rittenhouse should have just taken his beating.
Never mind that one of them had a gun, but
he literally showed a picture from frickin' Roadhouse and said that this was just a bar fight and Rittenhouse is to blame because he's the one who brought a gun.
Okay, so the scenario might be different by the time anybody watches this. As of filming this right now, their jury's in deliberation.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that they're still deliberating is a loss.
Well, it's also been leaked that they're only deliberating because of two people hanging on because they're afraid of violence. Mm-hmm. So let that kind of sink in a little bit. But the argument from the defense was all about the time that things happen, the in the moment stuff, what we would call self-defense. Mm-hmm. The argument from the prosecution centered around the fact that he brought a gun there to begin with is motive to kill. He intended to kill. So that's why it would be murder versus self-defense, because he intended to kill just by showing up with the gun. So, okay, go ahead and your rant then. I just wanted to give the background from where we're at right now.
And again, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? That's what the prosecutor is saying, because the prosecutor made the defense's case for them.
Mm-hmm.
The defense could have just gotten up and said, I rest. I mean, they didn't have to present anything because the prosecutor made the case for them.
Except his case was a different case.
Yeah. Because what his case is you do not have a legal right to self-defense, that you do not have a legal right to bear arms, because if you bear arms, you have forfeited your God-given natural right to self-defense. That's what the prosecution's case is. And that's why this should have been, a loop of walking into the deliberation room and walking right out if we lived in a sane world. And you cowards on the jury who are afraid of violence, we should all be afraid that you don't have the gumption to say every American has a God-given natural right to self-defense, and they have a right to bear arms if they so choose to enact that self-defense. That's what this case is about. And that is what is being destroyed by this prosecution and the media, who are blatantly skewing the evidence that is right in front of their eyes. In his opening statement, the prosecutor said, we have drone footage from the FBI. Policed his own community, indeed. So the prosecutor said, we have drone footage from the FBI that night. And this was the big reveal. This was the smoking gun that was going to make his case, that showed that Rittenhouse was chasing Rosenbaum, the pedophile who he shot first. Okay. It showed the opposite. It literally showed the opposite. It showed Rosenbaum hiding behind a car. Rittenhouse goes running by, and then Rosenbaum and his friend, who had a gun, not Rosenbaum, but his friend had a gun, they both start chasing Rittenhouse. The prosecution destroyed his own case if his case was Kyle Rittenhouse committed murder, but that's not his case. Like you said, his case is you don't have a right to bear arms. You don't have a legal right to self-defense, even in the face of all of this other aggression and lawlessness and destruction.
Just the fact that you had the gun proves you had intent to kill somebody, because guns kill people.
And
that's the case.
Yes. This is the logical, natural result of zero tolerance violence policies. As we have ranted about before, when we were kids in elementary school, if you got in a fight, you were taken before the principal or the vice principal, and the first thing they asked is who started it. They don't care anymore. You're both suspended. It doesn't matter if you were defending yourself or if you were defending, the poor nerd who always got picked on. Didn't matter. You're both suspended. And that's what this is it doesn't matter that these people were lighting a dumpster on fire and pushing it towards gas pumps. That is literally on video. That is literally what started one of these first confrontations, is Rittenhouse and one of the friends he was with go running in with fire extinguishers to put out this dumpster that is being pushed towards gas pumps. And that starts one of these confrontations that eventually leads to Rosenbaum getting shot. And let's ignore the fact that Rittenhouse showed a ridiculous amount of restraint, which is one of my other rants here, is that he is on video numerous times pointing his gun towards somebody who has a gun, like Rosenbaum's friend, or like Gage, what's his bucket, the guy who gets his bicep imploded or disintegrated later. That guy had a gun. Rittenhouse points his gun, the guy puts his hands up or backs off, and Rittenhouse doesn't shoot. It's only Grosskreutz is the guy that gets his bicep obliterated. He backs off at one point in the video when Rittenhouse is getting knocked to the ground. Rittenhouse is on the ground. He points his gun at Grosskreutz. Grosskreutz puts his hands up and backs away. Rittenhouse doesn't shoot. He goes to try and get up. Grosskreutz circles around to try and get behind him and grab his gun while pointing. He admitted on the stand under cross-examination that Rittenhouse pointed at you and didn't shoot the first time, right? Yeah. So it's only when you point your gun at him that that you shoot at him. Yeah. He admitted on the stand that he didn't get shot until he pointed his gun the second time at Rittenhouse. Was pointing it at his head in what looks to me like he's trying to circle around and shoot him in the back of the head execution style while he's sitting on the ground.
Well, and this is like a lot of things we have talked about. Are you making a judgment call, judgment call based on what happened or what you were told happened by the media? There's so many people coming out now that are like, whoa, I thought the people he shot were black. No, they were all white, as these riots tended to be. So just little facts like that, people immediately had assumptions about this case based on misrepresentation. So are you mad at Rittenhouse or the representation of Rittenhouse that you got?
Yep.
Here's another picture I wanted to bring up because I'll just leave it to our good friend to keep posting this crap. First of all, he hasn't been convicted of murder. He is on trial, but he has not been convicted of it. And yes, this is a tragic story on the left. It's a horrible story. But at the same time, that's the only one that keeps popping up. I'm like, if this whole thing is systemic, you should have more than one. Come on. But so first of all, it's a false dichotomy. It's implying that he's a murderer, which if it's self-defense, he didn't murder anybody. And then to put it with a case in the complete opposite side of the country, different jurisdictions, different people, that actually was a case of racism. Again, it's a false dichotomy.
It's worse than that because it's that one and memes like it are trying to say that that people just said, oh shucks, white kids will be white kids, go on about your business, Rittenhouse. The kid is having his life destroyed. He was put in a political ad by the current president of the United States in which he was compared to the KKK and the Unite the Right assholes. Okay. Rittenhouse should never have to work a day in his life because he should sue the ever living crap out of Biden, his political campaign, CNN, MSNBC, et al., and this prosecutor in the city. He has had his life destroyed over something that is obviously self-defense after he turned himself in. He ran straight to the police and they said, go, 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 because they weren't dealing with anything that night. So he goes home and the very next day he turns himself in to his local police department and along with his weapon.
Well, and if we want to just keep comparing things across the board and talk about privilege and stuff, Rittenhouse's bail was set at over $2 million. And any form of crowdfunding was stopped by the crowdfunders.
They should also be sued.
But now we've got another guy across the country recently just killed somebody also because he was drunk and driving over 150 miles an hour and hit another person, survived it, but killed the other guy. And his bail was set at $150,000. So you're talking about millionaire has his bail set at $150,000 for actually killing somebody by his own actions, by putting other people at risk versus reacting to other people's actions. And of course, we look at bad behavior. Yeah, he violated his bail terms. Oh, great, right? So if we want to start putting comparisons side by sides that don't exactly match, but try to put your point, well, I'm going to put that one up. We got a kid that's in jail without even being convicted with an extremely high bail, unheard of bail, versus a guy who killed somebody and it's pretty gosh darn obvious that he did it. His actions were the cause of that death. In fact, admittedly so, was out on bail with just a small portion of his income as the bail.
Yeah. The point of bail is to ensure that you show up for trial. How do you justify setting bail so high for someone who turned himself in? and also doesn't really have the means to flee the jurisdiction because he's a 17-year-old kid and its parents aren't exactly rich. So how do you justify that? One of the other, back to my ranting about what this case is really about. One of the things the jackass weasel prosecutor who should be challenged to fistfights every day of his life from now on. One of the things he points out is that he was only hit with a skateboard. He was only punched. He was only kicked, and he responded with deadly force. Okay. So I love the way the New York Times frames this. This was caught on tape. A security guard in San Francisco is trying to shoo away skateboarders and put up barriers to keep them out of the plaza of this building, and they get into some fisticuffs, and the New York Times calls it a tragic injury. It wasn't a tragic injury, it was an assault, and the trial has resulted in a mistrial. Okay, here's the security guard.
Oh crap.
All that happened was he got hit in the head with a skateboard.
Oof.
That's all. Let that sink in, people. This could have been a 17-year-old kid if he had been hit more squarely, or if he hadn't had a weapon to scare off these people from coming back for another hit. Because this guy got hit a couple of times, and I believe the one that did the most damage there was after he was already down, he got hit again, and then was out. Okay, so.
To which somebody could have also grabbed the AR-15, and
which they had already tried to do, and it is backed up by the forensics because these people have burn marks on their hands because that's how close they were to the barrel, to grabbing the barrel when he shot. And what you don't think they tried to portray these people, the prosecution tried to portray these people as heroes trying to stop an active shooter. How is he an active shooter? This was the narrative for the other people that were shot that tried to knock him down, tried to jump kick him in the face while he was on the ground, tried to take his gun, tried to shoot him, I think is what Grosskreutz is trying to do there. How is he an active shooter after he shot Rosenbaum when he's jogging away with his weapon pointed down in a safe position? He's jogging away and he's on video, Grosskreuz's own video, saying, "I'm going to the police." And he is running straight towards where all the flashing lights are. He says, "I'm going to the police." How is he an active shooter? You're not stopping anything. You're just trying to get yours. You're just trying to get even, to get back, to enact your own mob hate.
Big problems. First of all, just everything you talked about with the case. I mean, watching the videos, it is as clear-cut self-defense as you can get. So the argument, they had to go the route of he shouldn't have been there to begin with and hope they get those jurors. The secondary part of it was all the people trying to race bait with it, with the meme I brought up that our friend put up along that. But then the third part of it is it kind of is a spin-off of the race baiting part, because it's he was out there to stop the people protesting for this certain cause in Kenosha, because that was where Jacob Blake was shot. But also the fact that during that time they were trying to distance themselves and differentiate between protesters and rioters. He was there during the riot. This all happened during the riot. So to label him the white supremacist trying to silence voices that were protesting for a certain cause, you have to put them together again.
Yeah. And this was like, this incident happened on, I believe, the third night of the rioting. So that is why he was there, was because there had been 2 or 3 days previously of looting and burning and destruction.
So pick one. Did those riots represent you? In that case, he was there to stop the voice of that cause, right? Or did they not represent you? Because if you're going to say they represented you, guess what? We got a whole other slew of your bad people.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Jacob Blake, because that brings me to my main point that I've been leading to with this discussion of all the things Rittenhouse went through and how the prosecution is trying to portray it and say that even despite all that, he has no right to self-defense. Jacob Blake did a 10th of what these people did to Rittenhouse. And this DA's office, so far as I know, did not file charges against those officers. The big problem and the thing that infuriates me, and this friend who shares these dumb memes that I've tried to tell him over and over, is when you make every one of these cases about race, and that's all it's about, you preempt the discussion we need to have as a people, as a collective country, about police use of force. And we have given the examples of people who were not Black, who had excessive use of force against them in pretty disgusting ways. If Rittenhouse had been a uniformed officer, he would not have had to show that restraint, and I doubt he would have, because that's not how they're trained. The first time someone with a gun came charging towards him, he would have shot. And a whole bunch of people would have said he was justified. And the fact that that person with the gun was a white guy would have meant we probably wouldn't have had to go through all of this. Mm-hmm. And charges would not have been filed. We have a big problem in this country when a civilian is under higher scrutiny for using lethal force in defense of his life than an officer of the state. That should not be the case. The state should be held to a higher standard of lethal force. Mm-hmm. If we are going to give the state this monopoly on violence, as it is called by legal and government scholars and philosophers, if they are going to have this monopoly on the legitimate use of force, they need to be held to a higher standard so that the state's power does not become abusive. And mm-hmm. right now, when someone like Jacob Blake, who has raped this woman, is trying to take her kids, has stolen from this woman has a restraining order against him and has called 911, and he's acting violent and belligerent and telling the cops, I have a knife and I'm going to get it, and then goes and reaches down into the floorboard of his vehicle for a knife, and so the officers open fire. And that is considered a justified shooting. But this 17-year-old kid who is trying to protect the lives and property of the people in his community, and it is his community because his dad and his aunts and his uncles live there, and he has friends there, and he works there. It is his community. Enough with this bullshit that he crossed state lines looking for a fight. This is his community, and he's trying to protect it. And he gets hit with a rock or a piece of concrete or something. He gets hit with a skateboard. People with guns are chasing him, saying they're going to get him, saying they're going to kill him. And then finally, after all of that, he finally uses lethal force and he's charged with murder. We have a serious problem in this country.
I'm going to push back and agree on, because you said a lot of things in there. The pushback is, if you watch the whole Jacob Blake video, he didn't do a 10th. He fought the cops. He wrestled with them. Yeah. And you see him reach down and pick up something. He had the knife while he was fighting with the cops.
I thought he was getting the knife after he wrestled with
that
them.
Was the original thought, because he reached for something in the car, but he picked up the knife on the way to the car door. And in his interview with Michael Strahan, he says he did that. And nobody blinked an eye, because they're like, oh, poor Jacob Blake. And he's telling you exactly all the bad things he did in this interview, and everybody's like, oh, poor guy, because of the narrative around it. But so that's the little bit of pushback. So he had a lethal weapon in his hands when he was wrestling with the cops. He dropped it, picked it back up, and then they shot him after he tried to get in the car. But where was I going to agree with you? I don't remember. Oh, crap. Well, maybe it'll come back to me in this conversation. But I want to touch on one thing. If anybody should be under trial here, it, it should be the adults that brought Rittenhouse there for some sort of negligence. Because why the hell was a 17-year-old kid alone at that point in the night with that much going on?
Well, he wasn't alone. He didn't go there alone. He was there. There was, I believe, a group of 4 of them. I don't remember
But I
how he
mean,
got
ended up
separated.
alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did he get separated? That's the story that needs to be told right now, because did they just let him go off and do his own thing? Did they leave somewhere and not bring him along? How did this 17-year-old kid, because when you watch the trial, everybody talks about the crocodile tears. It wasn't that he was crying in that moment. He was hyperventilating. He was having an anxiety attack. That's different than just crying. He couldn't breathe. He was so now we've got a little bit of evidence that he has at least a little bit of anxiety. So you bring a gun, you have a little bit of anxiety, you're being attacked, you're all alone. It's amazing that he didn't shoot more people. If you really look at
it. I think the anxiety is PTSD. It's anxiety after the fact, thinking about, when you have time to think, that in the moment you don't necessarily have time to think. To me, that was coming from him having had the time to think and realizing how close he came to probably have been being killed. Okay. To me, that's what that was. And that is when I knew that we have become an evil country, and we are, our culture, our media, our politics are being run by evil people, because I knew what the reaction to that breakdown was going to be. The reaction to that breakdown should have been everyone saying, oh God, we've made a terrible mistake and we have destroyed this kid's life. But that's not what it was. It caused people like LeBron, and I don't care how big you are also someone that should be challenged to a fist fight every day of your life because you're a piece of shit.
Well, so that was a point I wanted to bring up, because Braun in his comments, and so many times in all these issues, this is a man who has probably, since he hit his first real growth spurt and was good at basketball, he's never had to experience a good ass kicking, and it shows. Because this, and I'm going to say the same thing for Kaepernick. He was so privileged growing up, and even though he was small for a football player, he was still 6'2" in high school.
He was also a star athlete, and star athletes are pampered.
They're pampered. And again, his choice was to play football instead of baseball, not any other extrinsic variables that he keeps talking about. Because, football, you got to be more than 6'2", 190 pounds, But these are guys that actually probably they're speaking from a place of privilege, if you want to use that word. They've never had their ass kicked just for being who they are. They've had their ass kissed for being who they are their entire lives. And that's the difference. Kyle Rittenhouse was being attacked just for who he was that night. And in a situation where people were actually trying to do real harm. And the argument that no one else got shot that night is not valid, because his shooting somebody probably stopped all other shootings for that night.
And it's likely that, it may just be because everybody else was a terrible shot, because in the videos in this trial and in other videos, you can hear gunshots. You can hear lots of other gunshots going off in the background. So whether that was just hooligans shooting into the air, or whether that was people shooting at people and they just happened to miss, there was a lot of gunfire going on that night.
And who is the freaking representative? Bush? Is it Cori Bush?
Cori Bush. Yeah.
Cori Bush, that says about the protesters being shot at for the
Ferguson
Blake thing. Yeah, in Ferguson, when there was a man who was arrested for that, and he was shooting at the police.
Yeah, it's a bald-faced lie, and no one's calling her on it.
No one at all. Well, people are, but they're considered
the racist authorities who have the facts and the data and say there was never a complaint, and it's not just there was never an official complaint. Is I haven't seen anyone who has been able to dig up this claim from that time, because that can be, a degree of corroboration. Is is if at least at that time, if she had said this, or if other people had said this, even if they hadn't made official police reports, it would still be a degree of corroboration. And so far as I've been able to tell, no one has found any of even that kind of corroboration. She's just making crap up to fuel a race war. That's all this is. She's trying to fuel a race war for her own political gain. That is evil. And that's who's in charge of this country. She is an elected representative who is telling blatant lies in order to fuel hatred and violence for her own personal gain.
Well, I think I made this comment during the CAP discussion. If you were to ask me, is there systemic racism? I will actually say yes. And that systemic racism is there is one group of people in this country that is more grifted than anybody else and convinced of things based on their skin tone more than anything else. I did it with an economic example. Your culture is this thing, which just so happens to cost a lot of money. And this is part of Braun too. He is a slave to Nike. And Nike is the same company that's convincing people who are in poverty to buy a $150 pair of shoes and have to buy a new one if they happen to crease it. This is all connected. This is all part of the overall grift, because that perpetuates the poverty, which perpetuates the movement, which perpetuates the marketing. And Braun knows it. He's not stupid.
No, that's why he won't say anything bad about China, because that's
Cap knows it. He's not stupid.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, they're both. Braun's a millionaire because he's one of the greatest basketball players ever. Cap is a millionaire because of this grift.
Because he's one of the greatest con artists ever.
Yeah, he wasn't one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. He had a good year.
He got benched for Blaine Gabbert,
but he had a good year. You got to admit he had a good year. Yeah.
Well, but when I first ranted about it, I brought up the statistics, and statistically, he had an okay year. The 49ers had a great year that year. So that was defense and running game, and then good scheme, being able to maximize what talents Kaepernick did have as a quarterback.
But they did take a step when he replaced Alex Smith, because normally you lose your starting quarterback, you're done for the year.
Oh.
At least from getting to the Super Bowl standpoint. You still might be a playoff team, but usually that's something that does you in as a team. And he was able to step up and play well that year, play well enough to get them to the final stage. So no one can deny that. But then he didn't perform after that. So that's where he ceases to have a good year and become a good quarterback. So he didn't have an argument there. He still doesn't have an argument there.
No.
So his multi-million dollars deals he's coming up with are all part of this grift of, we're going to blame everything on XYZ, even though we're the underlying cause of it. So I don't know. I guess theme of to summarize this, a 17-year-old kid has got his life ruined because of all of this, realistically, because it's the misrepresentation of Jacob Blake is the reason why he was there, because it started a counter movement of protest and then riot. That was why these people were there. Yeah. So if you really want to talk about responsibility, I talked about the adults in that situation. How about the people that spread the misinformation? Maybe they should be the ones paying for this whole situation. They should be the ones addressing the death of these two people and the obliteration of another one.
Yeah. And that's a good, that leads me to a point I've had for a while about this grift, as you put it, and the lies around it. It boggles my mind the heroes that this movement puts up. I went over a little bit of the rap sheet of Jacob Blake and what he was doing. Brown and Ferguson wasn't that bad, but he wasn't this gentle giant angel that he was portrayed to be. And yet, I forget his name. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The guy who died because he was selling Lucy's, selling single cigarettes outside of a convenience store.
Oh,
And
not
it,
Arbery. That's the one. The other case is going on right now.
yeah, that's the one. The guy who was
The,
jogging.
the original Hands Up, Don't Shoot, right? Or no, the original I Can't Breathe.
Yeah, the original I can't breathe. The hands up,
Oh,
the original hands up, don't shoot was
Michael
Brown
Brown.
and
Yeah.
Ferguson. But this guy, no, he wasn't some kind of an angel, but all he was doing, and he wasn't even he did not get physical with the police, but he was not complying because in his mind, and I think he was right, this is stupid. I'm not going to comply with these orders. All I'm doing is standing here on a public street corner selling single cigarettes. Why was the argument not, what the hell kind of bureaucratic police state do we have that it can lead to this? That because someone is standing on a corner selling single cigarettes, the police can be called and the police can use force. Now, it wasn't deadly force. He died because he was in poor health, but it was still force that led to his death. And that's a problem. It's also a problem that technically the police did nothing wrong. I think they ethically did something wrong, but legally they didn't do anything wrong. And that's a problem. That's something we need to address, but we're not, because we're fixated on race, because the people who run this grift want to talk about nothing but, oh, another black man killed by the police. No, stop. Let's talk about a man who died in the custody of the police and why that happened. And more importantly, how we fricking fix it so it doesn't happen again. We never get to that point because all we can talk about is color of this guy, color of this guy. Everybody angry now.
Trying to, yeah, you got me. It's bothering me that I can't remember this guy's name.
No. Well, can't remember his name because he was in and out of the media so fast. Why was this not one of your poster children? Instead, it was a blip, and then everyone went back to Ferguson because that was it happened shortly after. And everything went back to Ferguson within a few days, as I recall. It just boggles my mind that
you said it was in New York.
Yeah, it was in New York. One of the boroughs of New York City.
Was it Freddie Gray or something like that?
Possibly. That made me think of something else I was going to bring up, and I'm brain farting again.
Yeah, Freddie Gray. Yeah, so you've got a legit case for your cause, and you're bringing up all these other issues. Was it the girl that had a knife and was about to kill another girl, Ma'Khia Bryant?
She was in the process of swinging her arm to stab someone and was shot. If that is not a proper use of police lethal force, what the F is? There isn't. If you can't do that because of the color of the girl's skin and the color of the officer's skin, as I recall, he wasn't even white. I think he was Asian or Hispanic. If I recall correctly.
No, he was a ginger, I believe.
Oh,
okay. So he was white.
Shouldn't fricking matter. Yeah. He literally saved someone's life. This teenage girl was about to get stabbed.
That's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. This is part of the beautiful trouble, the activism. Had he held his hand and let her get stabbed, it would have been, the narrative would have been,
because he didn't care about enough. He didn't care about that victim because it was a black girl. Damned if you do, indeed. And the facts don't matter. It's witchcraft. It's mob rule. We are burning witches at the stake. We're just doing it with, smartphones and Twitter. But that's how far we have regressed this supposedly enlightened society. That's all, progressive and enlightened and better than those who came before us. And so we have to remove their statues.
Well, which was one of my motivations for kind of getting on here and just talking a lot of this stuff out, was our mutual friend who posts all this stuff it actually was very sad to me to watch somebody who's an otherwise intelligent individual become what amounts to a thrall.
Yeah.
Uh,
Getting sucked deeper and deeper into this grift.
yeah, he posts things, and you can just see the lack of thought in how it just keeps going down the same hole. And then he'll post something that's perfectly normal, and you're like, oh, there's a normal person right there, and you laugh at it, and you want to talk about it, but then another string of things, it's like
Anything that remotely has to do with race, and that logical part of his brain switches off, and he becomes part of the grift.
Yeah, well, and you're fed this ideology is kind of, I guess, the boring word for it, but you're fed this line that you can see things differently than other people because of who you are, because of the color of your skin, and you're seeing things in a way that you're told to see them, and I can see them in exactly that same way, and you're saying I can't. I just can also differentiate between reality and how you're seeing it. So I can put that bend on anything. In fact, if you look at a D'Angelo book, they're telling me I need to put that bend on it. I can do that, but I can also see that it's not true, or that if it is part of the problem, it might be, as Shelby Steele says, number 20 on the list of things that are the problem. And when it is the problem, I can 100% look you in the eye and say, yeah, that was this situation. Just like the backpack kid that I brought up in the other picture. Yep. Bunch of racist cops, racist judge. He ended up in jail. And
or maybe just incompetent. That's we need to be able to separate race out because we are obsessed with race, we're not actually talking about real police reform. Yeah, we've had a little bit of criminal justice reform, but we're not getting the real police reform that we need because the obsession is on race. And like you say, like Steele says, that may be like number 20 down on the list. That, yeah, there may be some racist people there, but let's talk about the incompetence. Let's talk about the training.
Or what was the break in the system that allowed that racist person to do that thing?
Yeah.
Where was the hole there that allowed for that to happen? So,
well,
I think that's a good place to kind of wrap it up.
Wrap it up, indeed.
Yeah. A lot of people should wrap it up.
Absolutely.
But yeah, a couple controversial topics that we're not supposed to be able to talk about. So,
well, then we will talk to y'all later, and probably next time confirm how disappointed I'm going to be tomorrow night.
Yeah. I did you read the follow-up conversations between Stephen and I?
I haven't. No, I haven't looked at that.
So
that was a lot.
Yeah, we eventually want to talk the COOF again, and have our California buddy on as well. But we actually were chatting online, and I think part of the issue was a misrepresentation of where I come from, because it was immediately lumping me in a certain camp, which is what we talk about. And we kind of cleared a lot of that up. So I think it's going to be it was a productive discussion last time, but I think it'll be even more productive because we will be talking from a different angle on that. So, and we've been sending back, because I don't want, the last time we talked wasn't really well planned. So he was giving me sources that I'd never seen before, and I was giving him sources that he had never seen before. And to read it and comment in real time is different than we've been open with each other on our sourcing and why we think such and such is what. So we can actually talk on the merits with full knowledge of what the other person has been looking at. And I think that's going to make it more productive as well. So, but we'll talk the drug that should not be named, and the preventative stab that should not be named as well in that situation, which we actually agree on some things, but I think as far as the preventative medicine, we probably will disagree on some things as well. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be fun. So save that for when I get back.
All right, we'll put a pin in that, and we will see you all next time.